He couldn't feel his hands anymore. The cold had taken them hours ago. He tried to move his fingers. Nothing. Just silence. Just darkness. And the worst part? He could still hear their voices in his head, the men who left him there. The men who looked at his broken body and kept walking. This is the story of Marcus Cole. A man who was left for dead in one of the most unforgiving places on earth. A man who, 27 days later, walked out on his own 2 feet. But what happened in those 27 days, nobody fully understands. Not even Marcus. It started with a job. Marcus was 51 years old. A structural engineer hired to assess a remote mountain dam site in a deep canyon region of northern Canada. No nearby towns. No cell signal. Just rock, river, and sky. He had worked with the same 2-man crew for 6 years. Darian and Hooks. He trusted them completely. That was his first mistake. The morning of day 1 started like any other. They drove 4 hours into the backcountry in a company truck. Tools loaded. Coffee cold. Nobody talked much. Marcus noted cracks in the canyon wall above the dam. He climbed down a rope ladder to get a closer look. That's when the ground shifted. A section of loose rock broke free from above. It hit him like a wall. He tumbled down the embankment and crashed into the shallow riverbed below. His left leg snapped on impact. 2 ribs cracked. His head struck a boulder. And then, nothing. Blackness. When he opened his eyes, the light had changed. Hours had passed. He lay face up in 6 inches of freezing river water. He tried to call out. His voice came out broken and small. He turned his head slowly. The rope ladder was gone. The truck was gone. Darian and Hooks were gone. He called their names. The canyon walls swallowed his voice. He called again. Nothing came back. That's when he realized he was never meant to survive. He dragged himself out of the water using only his arms. His left leg was useless. Every movement sent white-hot pain through his ribs. He managed to reach a small gravel bank beside the river. He lay there, shaking. The temperature was dropping fast. It was late September. In that canyon, that meant near-freezing nights. He had no pack. No radio. No emergency kit. Everything had been in the truck. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he found when he checked his jacket pocket. A single granola bar. Crushed. And a small folding knife. That was everything he had. 1 broken bar and a 2-inch blade. Against a fractured leg, 2 cracked ribs, a head wound still leaking blood, and a canyon with no way out that he could see. He ate half the granola bar. He forced himself to stop there. He had no idea how long he would need it to last. He used his sleeve to press against the gash on his head until the bleeding slowed. He found a thick branch along the bank and used the knife to strip it down. He tied it against his leg using laces from his boots and strips torn from his undershirt. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Night came fast. The temperature crashed. He buried himself under a pile of dead leaves and dry brush he could reach without standing. He pressed his back against the canyon wall for wind cover. His body shook so hard he bit his tongue. He told himself to stay awake. He couldn't afford to sleep in this cold. Not yet. Not until he knew his core temperature was stable. But sleep took him anyway. He woke up on day 2 still alive. That surprised him. His leg had swollen badly overnight. The makeshift splint had held, but just barely. He needed water. Clean water. The river was right there, but glacial runoff carries sediment and bacteria. He had no way to filter it. He drank anyway. He had no choice. He knew what dehydration would do to him faster than anything else. He spent day 2 trying to assess his situation. The canyon ran roughly north to south. The road they had driven in on was at the top of the northern ridge. That ridge was at least 300 feet above him. With a broken leg and cracked ribs, climbing 300 feet of loose rock was not a plan. It was a death sentence. He needed another way. He remembered something from the drive-in. The river had to exit somewhere. All rivers do. If he followed it south, eventually the canyon would open up. Eventually there would be lower ground. Eventually there would be a road, a trail, a structure, something. He had no idea how far that was. Could be 2 miles. Could be 30. He started moving south on day 3. Crawling mostly. Using the branch as a crutch when the bank was flat enough to attempt standing. Progress was brutal. In 8 hours of effort, he covered maybe half a mile. His hands bled from the gravel. His ribs screamed with every push forward. He finished the last of the granola bar at noon and tried not to think about what that meant. And then he found something that made no sense. Pressed into the soft mud of the riverbank was a boot print. Fresh. No more than a day old. The tread pattern was deep and clean. Someone had been here recently. Someone wearing heavy work boots. Marcus stared at it for a long time. He was days from the nearest road. This area wasn't on any hiking trail. Who else could possibly be out here? He called out. His voice echoed off the canyon walls and came back empty. He waited. Nothing moved. No answer came. He told himself it could be another survey crew. It could be a hunter. It could be anyone. But something about that single boot print, just one, with no others visible nearby, made the hair on his neck stand up. He kept moving. But he moved differently after that. More carefully. Watching the shadows. By day 5, hunger had become physical. A deep, gnawing pain behind his stomach that radiated into his back. He found mussels clinging to rocks in the shallower parts of the river. He pried them open with his knife and ate them raw, gagging with each one. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But it kept the worst of the hunger at bay. On day 6, it rained. Hard, cold rain that soaked through everything. A blessing and a punishment at once. He caught fresh water in a hollow section of bark and drank until the cramping in his stomach eased. He found a narrow overhang in the canyon wall and pressed himself under it. He sat there for most of the day, shaking, watching the rain turn the river gray and loud. That night he heard something he couldn't explain. A low, rhythmic knocking sound. Coming from somewhere up the canyon wall to his left. Not an animal sound. Not the river. Something deliberate. He listened for nearly an hour. Then it stopped. He didn't sleep at all. Day 7 brought a moment of hope. He spotted what looked like a rusted cable running along the canyon wall about 40 feet up. Old survey equipment, maybe. Or an abandoned zip line from a mining operation. If he could reach it, if he could follow where it led, it might mean infrastructure. It might mean people. But 40 feet up a sheer rock face with a broken leg was not a climb. It was a fantasy. He stared at it for a while. Then he turned and kept crawling south. By day 9, his mind started slipping. It began small. He thought he heard his name called across the water. He turned, expecting to see someone on the opposite bank. No one was there. He told himself it was the wind. But the sound had been too clear. Too specific. His name. Not a shout. Almost a whisper. The flashback started on day 10. Short, sharp. His daughter's face when she was 7 years old, standing in a kitchen doorway in yellow pajamas. His ex-wife's voice during an argument he couldn't remember clearly but felt in his chest. A birthday. A dog he had owned 20 years ago. The memories came without warning. They hit him like small electric shocks and left him disoriented, unsure for a moment where he was, what year it was, why his hands were covered in dried blood. He began talking to himself out loud. Not planning. Not problem-solving. Just talking. Filling the silence because the silence had started feeling alive. Like something inside it was listening. By day 11, he stopped trying to survive. He sat down on a flat rock above the waterline and didn't move for most of a day. He wasn't unconscious. He was awake. He just stopped. His body had no calories left to burn for effort. His leg had developed a deep, throbbing infection he could feel pulsing with his heartbeat. The skin around the fracture was hot and discolored. He knew what that meant. He had seen infected wounds before. If this continued without treatment, he was looking at sepsis within days. He sat on that rock and thought about his daughter. Her name was Renee. She was 23 now. They hadn't spoken in 8 months. A fight over something small that had grown into something large the way small fires sometimes do. He thought about that. He thought about how he had assumed there was always more time to fix things. He sat there with that thought like it was a stone in his hands. Heavy. Permanent. And then, something changed. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a vision. It was a smell. Wood smoke. Faint, almost imagined, drifting from somewhere further south along the canyon. Marcus raised his head. He breathed in slowly. There it was again. Thin and distant but real. Wood smoke meant fire. Fire meant a person. A person meant a way out. He got up. What happened next took everything he had. He cut strips from his jacket lining and repacked the splint on his leg as tightly as he could bear. He soaked his undershirt in the river and wrapped it around the infected area to bring the heat down. He found 2 stronger branches and fashioned a crude set of crutches. They were rough and uneven. They tore the skin under his arms within the first hour. He didn't stop. He moved through the rest of that day and into the night by smell alone. Chasing the wood smoke south. Losing it when the wind shifted. Finding it again. His crutches slipped on the wet gravel. He fell 3 times. Each fall drove the air from his lungs and left him face down on the bank, gasping. Each time he counted to 10 and got back up. On day 14, the canyon walls began to lower. The rock face on either side dropped from 300 feet to 100. Then to 50. The river widened. The gravel banks became flat and broad. He could see sky in a wider arc above him. His heart moved in a way it hadn't moved in days. But that's when the storm hit. It came from the north with almost no warning. Wind first. Then sleet. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in under an hour. The river rose fast. Within 30 minutes the flat gravel banks were submerged. He was forced up onto a narrow ledge of rock barely wide enough to stand on. The sleet drove sideways into his face. He pressed himself against the canyon wall and held on. One hand gripping a crack in the rock. The other arm wrapped around his crutch. The river roared below him, brown and violent and rising. He stayed on that ledge for 11 hours. He could not sit. The ledge was too narrow. He stood, leaning against the rock, through the entire night. His good leg trembled with exhaustion after the first 2 hours. After 6 hours, it burned with a deep muscle fatigue he had never felt before. After 9 hours, it simply went numb. He bit down on the collar of his jacket to stay awake. He talked to Renee out loud, into the wind. He told her things he should have said 8 months ago. He told her he was sorry. He told her he was coming home. The storm broke just before dawn. The river dropped through the morning. By midday the gravel banks were visible again. He stepped down from the ledge and his good leg nearly buckled. He caught himself on the crutch. He stood still for a full minute, breathing. Then he moved. On day 16 he found the source of the wood smoke. It was a trapper's shelter. Small, half-collapsed, clearly abandoned for at least a season. But inside there was a rusted tin stove, a stack of dry wood, a wool blanket black with age, and a shelf with 3 cans of food with no labels. He wept. He stood in the doorway of that rotting little structure and wept like he had not wept since he was a child. He started a fire. He ate one of the unlabeled cans cold, using the knife to open it. Beans. He had never tasted anything better in his life. He wrapped himself in the wool blanket and slept for 14 hours straight. He spent days 17 through 22 at the shelter. He needed the rest more than he needed to move. He rationed the remaining 2 cans. He boiled river water in the tin stove using an old lid as a pot. His infection began to recede slowly. The heat and the rest and the food were doing what his body desperately needed. The discoloration in his leg faded from deep purple to a dull yellow green. On day 23 he found something inside the shelter he had missed on his first night. Tucked behind a loose board near the floor was an old laminated map. Faded. Water damaged along one edge. But readable. He spread it out in the firelight and traced the river with one finger. According to the map, the canyon opened into a valley roughly 6 miles south. In that valley there was a logging road. 6 miles. On crutches. With a healing but still fractured leg. He left on day 24. The 6 miles took 3 days. Not because of the distance. Because of the terrain. The canyon floor in the final miles was broken and uneven, littered with fallen trees from old floods. He had to climb over them, or around them, or under them. Each obstacle cost him 20 minutes of effort and left him exhausted. On the second night he slept in the open under a lean-to he built from branches, shaking through a hard frost with no fire and nothing left to eat. On the third day, the walls of the canyon fell away completely. He stepped out into open valley. Tall grass. Sky in every direction. And there, cutting across the valley floor maybe a quarter mile to his east, was a gravel road. He stood at the edge of the canyon and stared at it for a long time. He didn't move. He just stood there, breathing the open air. Then he started walking. He reached the road and sat down in the middle of it. He had no energy left to stand and wait. He just sat down in the gravel and looked up at the sky. A logging truck found him 40 minutes later. The driver thought he was looking at a body. He stopped the truck, climbed out slowly, and walked toward what looked like a man lying dead in the road. Then Marcus turned his head. The driver stumbled backward and grabbed the door of his truck. Later he told the paramedics that the man's eyes looked like something you see in old war photographs. Present. But coming from somewhere very far away. Marcus Cole was airlifted to a regional hospital. Fractured tibia, 2 cracked ribs, severe dehydration, early-stage sepsis, and 11 pounds of body weight lost. He was listed in serious but stable condition. He was admitted under his own name. and the hospital, following procedure, notified his emergency contact. His daughter Renee arrived 12 hours later. The police launched an investigation into Darian and Hooks. When contacted, both men told the same story. They said Marcus had been swept away by a flash surge in the river. They said they searched for 2 hours before dark. They said they drove out to report his disappearance to the authorities. Records showed they did file a missing persons report 4 days after the incident. The company had already processed his death benefits paperwork by the time Marcus walked out of that canyon. The case is still open. Neither man has been charged. Marcus has not spoken publicly about what happened. He gave one statement to the police and nothing more. He has declined every interview request. He returned to a quiet life with very little explanation of what he endured. But the people who know him say he is different now. Slower to speak. More careful with silences. His daughter moved to the same city 6 months after his rescue. She has never spoken to the press either. There is one detail that investigators could never explain. The boot print Marcus found on day 3, fresh, single, unexplained, was located miles from where any other person had any documented reason to be. No other crew. No hunters with permits in that area. No record of anyone else in that canyon. Marcus was asked about it once. Just once, by a detective working the case. He listened to the question. He looked at the table between them for a long time. Then he looked up and said, simply, "I don't know." He never said anything else about it. Even today, he never tells anyone what